wish that Franklin D. Roosevelt had lived to see this day.
Welcome to Beyond the Streets, a new production from the Baltimore Guardian Angels. I'm Maynard Edwards, hosting for today as our fearless leader, Marcus Dent, is off on special assignment. We'll talk about that in just a minute. Joining me also right now is acting chapter commander Jazz and our chief statistician, he's so good at crunching the numbers. Even the Baltimore City Police Department are using his numbers. Taxman joining us as well. How you doing, guys?
We're doing good. Thanks for having us.
All right, before we go any further, our friend, our leader, our spiritual captain, Marcus Strider Dent, is right now driving across a frozen lake going ice fishing in Minnesota. Is this correct?
Well, I'm glad you called him the spiritual captain because he might need prayers today. He is in Minnesota, and they are having the Marcus Dent Chronicle number 2, which is ice fishing. The first one they had was driving on a frozen lake that was cracked all over the place. And apparently there's these huts out there where you can go fishing. There's heaters in the huts and all kinds of crazy things going on.
So this is why crime in Baltimore was off the hook the last 6 months or so. Is that Strider's been in the Midwest, goofing around at Paisley Park.
So we need to bring him home.
That's right.
Yeah.
Strider, I know you're watching this. Black people don't belong in Minnesota. It's way too cold. White people don't belong in Minnesota. It's way too cold. So we've got a lot of stuff to talk about. And the reason that you guys wanted to take the show, we've been doing this sort of as a podcast for a while, and then some videos here and there. And now more of a steady, ongoing program. What's the reasoning behind this, Jazz? What's the thinking of bringing this out now?
Well, when you hear something, it's okay to hear, but when you see it and you hear it, it makes it more of an interactive type of program. So what we'll be doing is we'll be having the guests coming in, and we'll be having them, talk about their projects and their lives, and it'll be an array of social, economic, all kinds of issues and topics. So we just thought we'd make it a little more interactive.
Now, obviously, with the Baltimore Guardian Angels brand, so to speak, involved, crime and helping communities is going to be the focus here. So kicking that off, let's look back at the year that was 2017, if we could. It's January right now as we tape this. We all know what a rough year it was, but to just discuss exactly what kind of a rough year it was. Taxman, the big number everybody looks at is that murder, that homicide total, which for the year was 343. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
But there are other numbers that are equally, if not more, disturbing in some ways. I know we were up in basically every violent crime category. So what are some of the more, disturbing ones?
Well, unfortunately, there's been a lot of talk about the homicides, and unfortunately the homicide rate is up. It's been up since Freddie Gray. But one thing that we have done in our statistical analysis is that we've been able to determine the various types of analysis that really digs down into the heart of what the issues are possibly in Baltimore City. We can go back to 2014, where Baltimore was considered the 40th most violent city, not in the United States, but the world.
And that's above Mexico City. It's above some of the cities where there are wars going on right now. That's 40.
Well, you don't count the wars, but you do count murders and etc. But wars are exempt. But when you deal with murder per se, you're considering that the number of homicides per 100,000 people or residents. 2015, Freddie Gray's year. The Baltimore City was 19th most violent city in the world. And then in 2016, they were 26th. Now this year, 2017, they set a record for homicides per 100,000 at 55.8. That's 56 homicides per 100,000 people. And then people wonder why Baltimore is considered one of the most violent cities in the world. We have the information. We have the facts. We can tell you that the homicides per week for 2017 were 6.6 homicides per week. All 52 weeks it averaged that amount.
So basically, murders took a couple of holidays this year, and other than that, there was a homicide a day.
Theoretically, yes.
So they took off like Easter, Arbor Day, and Christmas from homicides, and beyond that, we wiped somebody out a day with a homicide.
Well, take January, for example.
So
right
far,
now,
January.
as we speak, there are 12 homicides in January as of the 21st of January 2018. The average from 2009 until 2017 was 18.6 homicides in a month. Now, what skewed that prior to that was it was an average of 17 homicides in January from 2009 to 2016. So what we're talking about is that last year there were 32 homicides in January. So what happened was it skewed the numbers by raising it up. With 343 recorded homicides, and I say recorded homicides, this is the second most violent year in over 30 years. And we have been able to track the homicides that go back. The Guardian Angels started tracking homicides in 2008. And we've been tracking homicides ever since. Every single homicide, every single victim, 2,326.
Wow.
And we did an analysis comparing a war zone in Afghanistan at one time as compared to the number of homicides in Baltimore City.
Afghanistan safer?
Yes.
Yes.
In a war zone. But Baltimore City is a war zone.
Here's the thing that I guess is of most concern to me when I hear these numbers, is that I hear these numbers and then I'm continually hearing the narrative from city leadership, from communities all over. Oh, it's not so bad. It's not as bad as they're making it out in the media, so on and so forth. This isn't the media. These are actual numbers. So, Jazz, I know you get a chance to be involved with community members and residents more so than anyone else that are in the neighborhoods that are most affected by this. Because, there are safe areas in Baltimore City. I mean, these murders aren't happening in Roland Park. These are happening
Right.
in bad areas of the city. I mean, air quotes, bad areas of the city. So what do the members of those communities, what do those residents have to say when they hear these numbers? Are they frustrated when they hear people in Federal Hill say, oh, it's not so bad, it's not that bad here, or are they also drinking that Kool-Aid and trying to pretend it's not as bad as all that, when really it is as bad as all that?
Well, I think what we saw in 2017, in the beginning of 2018, is a change in that, because even the people in Federal Hill who previously said, it's not that bad, they even had problems. I mean, there was a safety walk in Federal Hill put together by the city councilman in that area, and they had like 200 people show up for the walk. So now you have these affluent areas of the city that are having the problems now that are bleeding over from the rest of the neighborhoods and the communities outside. And the problems are starting to slowly filter into everywhere in the city. So now these places that were considered untouched by the high violent crime issues are starting to shift towards the same feeling that even these more affluent areas have.
Is that what it's going to take? Is it going to take the violence leaking into places like Roland Park for it to really get noticed? I mean, I get frustrated when I hear everyone in Baltimore say, "Oh, this is this is racist. The police are racist. This group's racist. That racist." In Baltimore City, we've had African Americans as leaders in the city council and the last several mayors. So I have a little trouble with that storyline, but I don't think we can discount the idea that race must play some kind of role into it. So, what has your experience or discussion led you to conclude at this point with regard to how that fits into the larger picture?
In terms of race, I mean, I don't know that race particularly plays a part in it. I think the social structure needs to change. The culture of Baltimore needs to change. We need to find a way to improve the economic situation in Baltimore. I don't think that we can fix one piece of something and expect it to fix the entire problem. It's kind of like trying to put Humpty Dumpty back together. Unless you can find all the broken pieces, you can't put it back together completely. So realistically, the racism issue is only an issue if we make it one. Crime is crime. It does not just affect the black population of Baltimore. Even if what was it, 80 some odd % of the homicides last year were black males, the fact of that is that there's a reason for that. So we can't put a Band-Aid on it and not try to figure out what the actual disease is.
Fair enough. So obviously we need to talk a little bit about the events of the last 72 hours, say. As we record this today, Kevin Davis has been police commissioner for the last few years. When did he come in?
He came in when Batts was replaced in 2015 under Stephanie Rawlings-Blake.
Okay, so 2015, Kevin Davis comes in, and he was just let go by Mayor Catherine Pugh. I look at that, and I say, well, I don't know that Kevin Davis was necessarily doing a bad job, but when the ball team isn't winning, the manager is the one that gets fired. So that's kind of my take on it. He wasn't necessarily doing a bad job, but this shows the upper management saying we're going to do something drastic to try and solve this problem. You guys work pretty close with Kevin Davis. You guys are out there in the streets all the time. What are your thoughts with regard to the termination of the police commissioner?
I personally, in a way, I think you're right. It's changing the management in order to try to fix the team. I just think the way that it was done could have been different. There's so much going on. I think that when Kevin Davis took office, he really was playing with a bad hand from the outset. Then you had the Department of Justice investigation, then you had the consent decree. So in a way, now they say that the police force itself has low morale, and they're trying to change the leadership to maybe improve the morale of the officers. Well, I understand that, but just changing leadership is not going to fix the problem either, unless we can find ways to change the actual, the reasons for the crime. So there's, they spoke about the surplus officers that they're putting out on the streets. Well, where are these surplus officers coming from? If you take officers from one place then and put them to another section of the city, then place A is left, unguarded. So I would like to know where the surplus officers are coming from. And a lot of these initiatives that they're talking about are things that have been going on for the last year. So it's not really a change it's a change in the figurehead, but the program itself has stayed the same. So you're going to get the same results. It's like, the mayor comes in and it's a new mayor, so we have a new staff, but she has to do things her way. Unless we change the program, then we won't change the course of the future.
Taxman, how about you? Kevin Davis, dismissal?
Well,
Thoughts?
frankly, I think that this was a desperation move. I think that Pugh let him go. It wasn't Davis was not her man. He was brought on by a prior administration. But the thing is that it was a desperation move. She stands on her record as saying we want to do better with improved crime, as far as reducing crime in the city. So the thing is, I think she wants to get reelected, and she's trying to protect her phony baloney job. Real simple.
No love lost between Taxman and Mayor
No,
Catherine
none.
Pugh right now. So the new police commissioner coming in, Jazz, what do we know about the new man taking the job, about the person who has been appointed as the interim police commissioner by Mayor Catherine Pugh? And what can you tell me that you've heard so far? Because I know you hear things from rank and file officers. So
Yeah.
Tell me what you know and give us the info on that.
Well, Daryl D'Souza's been deputy commissioner. He served as deputy commissioner under Kevin Davis. He's been a 30-year veteran of the police department. He's from New York City.
But he has history with Baltimore City.
Yeah, he's been a 30-year veteran of the force. So he came up through the ranks, basically, and now he's police commissioner. So it's basically the same thing that Freddie Bielfeld did, which was the last police commissioner we had that came up through the ranks. And I've heard that he's a pretty good guy. I mean, that's pretty much all I've heard about him, is that he's a good guy. Other than that, I've not heard much about. I know he was in charge of patrols, so he was the chief of patrols for a while, and I know he also served in the Northeast District, I think it is. So from what I've heard, he's a good guy, and he has ideas. It's just going to be a matter of the community's accepting him. I know that Kevin Davis was one of those guys that was out in the community all the time. You know, he'd go to the community meetings everywhere. He had no problem shaking hands with anybody or talking to people or joking around, whatever. So I think that in a way, Daryl D'Souza has to kind of live up to that. While he has to walk a fine line between community relations and policing, which is the same thing that Kevin Davis tried to do.
Taxman, what do you hear?
It's not getting any easier, regardless of who's going to be the commissioner. Baltimore City has had 40 police commissioners, and it's since the Baltimore City Police were formulated. And the thing is, it doesn't get any...
To be fair, in like the 1800s. So,
the 1800s.
Yeah, it's been a couple years.
It's been a while. But the thing is, it's not going to get any easier. You have so many laws that are being put forth. You have, like, for example, the Good Samaritan Law, which has been put into effect. It's very difficult to be a police officer. Ever since 2015, when Freddie Gray was when we lost Freddie Gray, the thing is that it's not getting easier for the police. They're demoralized. We've heard that. We've heard that from the cops themselves when we're out on patrol.
For the better part of a decade at this point.
Yes.
So the question then is, what are the police to do to change up that formula, as you said, Jazz? Because let's go back a couple of years, under Mayor Martin O'Malley and under my buddy Eddie Norris, there was a very aggressive stance by the police department. I mean, they were, for all intent and purposes, they were out there, to use Ed's words, they were out there being the police, locking people up. If there was a window broken, they found out about it, they lock them up, and they made arrests, and they got people off the streets. It wasn't zero tolerance, which I know gets thrown around a lot, but it was very aggressive form of policing. And we do, looking at those numbers, see that, you know, the homicide totals for those years went down. Violent crime did go down when they were locking up the bad guys. But then there was pushback from the community saying, well, you're arresting too many people. And then, you know, an investigation shows that there were about 100,000 arrests that were vacated during those years because it was the cops had overreached a little bit. Then we get into this idea of community policing over the last several years, and we see what this community policing has brought us, which is record homicide totals, sexual assaults, off of burglaries. I mean, it's like Taxman said earlier, basically we're up in every measure of violent crime. So where's that balance between the overly aggressive policing and the community policing that seems to be not working at all?
I think the word balance is an interesting choice of words because I think that is actually what we need. I think between the Department of Justice investigation and the consent decree, and even with the Freddie Gray incident, that, you know, the
and when we talk about the Department of Justice investigation, you're talking about into the corruption of the
police department,
the gun drug task force, the six officers, 7 officers that have been arrested over the last couple of years, and you know, all of that stuff. So that's what
all
you're
of
about.
that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think that, you know, there's no faith in the police department in terms of how the community feels about it. I think we have to, again, walk that fine line of instilling that faith that does not exist and showing that there's reformation, you know, attempts at reformation at least, trying to be made in the police department. But with I don't know if you've read the consent decree or even the first draft of the monitoring plan. I read that. It was 87 pages long. But there's a great emphasis on community policing, and it takes...
But what do we even mean by that term, community police? What does that mean? I mean, you're in a community and you're policing. That's not a definition. That's a very vague term. It doesn't mean anything.
I think the way it comes off as if you actually read those documents is that they want the police department to be, I want to say, user-friendly. So... it's a fine line between, hey, I'm going to call the cops when they show up. They have to be mean to the perpetrators but still be nice. So how do you do that? How do you be a police officer without policing? And I think Ed Norris has a great point. If we take away the ability of our police officers to be police, then what are we paying them for? Of course crime's going to go up. So now with the changes that are being made to the laws in terms of what the police are and are not allowed to do and what they can and cannot, people can and cannot be prosecuted for, there's a loosening of the laws, which basically, you know, you have some people that say, well, that's what's needed, and you have others who say, well, wait a minute, crime is going up. So how do you find the balance? And I think if Daryl D'Souza can figure that out, he'll be the best commissioner Baltimore's ever had.
Well, I would agree with you. I mean, I think that's the whole key is figuring out where that balance point is. But I am of the opinion, and I don't live in some of these, worse off neighborhoods of Baltimore City that see higher crime rates, because there are zip codes that are much higher. And Taxman, you have the numbers on those. There are zip codes that are hit a lot harder by these crimes than others. What's the worst one, as for instance?
Well, in 2017, it was 21215 Western.
Okay.
In 2016, 21217 Western. 2015, 21217 Western.
So obviously there are areas of the city that have a worse go of it than others, but as long as people are getting hurt, as long as people are dying, as long as people are, experiencing, sexual assault and burglaries and robberies at such a high rate, I'm a fan of letting the police go in and just lock down everything that's moving, and then once things start to settle down, then going back in and trying to make friends. Because I just, when people's lives are at stake, I don't see what else you can do.
No, but then, you have to, I've often thought to myself, if I were the parent of that person that just got, abused by the police officer, how would I feel? And then even, I guess it's because I'm me, I look at it differently. So if, like my brother gets thrown into the back of a police van and he gets kicked around, well, you say, well, the police officer was wrong. But then ask yourself, well, why is he being picked up by the police? What was he doing? So at some point, the community itself has to take responsibility for what they are letting happen in their communities. There are a lot more people out there that are good than there are that are bad. And if the good people step up and say, we're not going to tolerate this, we're not going to accept it as part of our community, that's what happens. We talked about Federal Hill. If somebody litters in Federal Hill, you get a walk with 300 people. So that's because, and their community is safe because they do what it takes to keep that community safe.
But the argument is that in these other communities, those good people are scared. And to me, okay, so you use the example of your brother. Your brother gets knocked around by the cops and thrown in the back of a police car. Let's assume he was doing something mildly wrong, but not worth a big beating. If your brother gets thrown in the back of the police car, but that saves him from being killed because of whatever it is he's doing, I don't know. I think having some aggressive policing for 6 months, a year, whatever, to get those awful crime numbers down, maybe that's a justifiable thing. I mean, maybe you need to go in. It's like being a parent, when you go in at your kid, if your kid's doing something they shouldn't be doing, you might have to give them a spanking, but you spank them so that they don't end up dead by sticking their hand in a light socket. And so there's that trading point. I just feel like if we let the police be the police for a while, and then once things have started to settle down, then we find a way to smooth everybody's feathers over. But I don't live there, so maybe.
No.
I will stipulate to the fact that my opinion may be less valid because it's not real likely I'm going to get the hell beat out of me by a cop.
Well, I agree with you. Wholeheartedly. Realistically, the police need to be police again. But when your hands are tied by the federal government, or they answer to the mayor as well. So you're again walking that fine line between what you can and can't do. How do you get the communities, the mayor, the federal government to agree to let you be aggressive when there's an the initial investigation said that you're violating civil rights? Which do you want? Do you want clean streets? Do you want lower crime numbers, or do you want to let the crime be rampant and out of control and the officers be nice to everybody? As a parent, you can be nice when you have to be nice, but if the child does something wrong, you still need to correct them, which I think is why we have the issues we have with the repeat offenders. So the police lock up the person that's been locked up 20 times, they drag them in, they go before a judge, the judge lets them go. So what are the police doing? They're running in circles, arresting the same people over and over.
Yeah, and I understand what you're saying about violating people's civil rights, and I'm not saying that that's acceptable or that's tolerable, but if someone's civil rights are violated and then they go to court and they are either exonerated or somehow, it said, listen, oopsie, we're sorry. To me, that's still better than being involved in a criminal activity where you could end up, dead. I feel like, yes, no one's civil rights should be violated, but if we need to break a few eggs right this minute so we don't have these larger issues, maybe that's a trade-off because we got to do something. Something has got to be done. We can't lose over 300 people a year to homicide, and the city's just not that big. It's just not. There's not that. We had more murders than New York City, and their population just absolutely dwarfs ours.
New York City's per capita homicide rate last year was a little over 2 point something.
Right.
We were at 55. So 55,
Way more violent.
55 point something per, homicides per capita with 600,000 people in Baltimore City. So we're killing off people and others are moving. The population is decreasing, but the homicide rate's going up. There's not going to be anybody left by the end of 2020.
Well, having said all of those things, if you could give one or two pieces of advice to Daryl D'Souza right now to say, these are the things that, we're in the communities, we talk to these people, they're not afraid of us, we see this. If you could give those little pieces of advice to Daryl D'Souza right now, what would those one or two pieces of advice be, Taxman?
Well, first of all, I would look to Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C.
For money or for help?
For advice.
Okay.
The former commissioner for Washington, D.C. had a plan where what she would call for all hands on deck. Every cop worked. They would go into an area about 5 to 10 blocks wide. In fact, Strider actually was with the commissioner in D.C. when one of those raids took place. Right now, in 2017, there were 116 homicides in Washington, D.C., yet they have 25,000 more people. Well, the thing is that, and I asked the hierarchy, why don't you do what D.C. has done? Oh, it would cost too much money to do that. We would have lawsuits. D.C. had lawsuits. They were thrown out. The people who were running the Washington, D.C. government, they were complaining that it cost too much money to pay for the cops, but yet the crime is down considerably. That is the advice that I would recommend. Do an all-hands-on-deck program and go after the areas. We patrolled the tri-state area, district area in Baltimore City. When we were out there, how many patrol cars did we see in a 4-hour stretch?
I think there's maybe one.
One.
Wow.
And they're saying that they have plenty of cops. Look back to when they had below 200 homicides. They cut the funding for over 400 cops. So they don't have those 400 cops. Now they have to scramble to get the cops back and put them out on the street. And then you have to have these rookies go out there. And then you have to have rookies, and are they qualified to deal with people out there on the street? Are they have weapons that can kill you? Have they been examined and checked out to determine whether they are qualified to carry a weapon? Business psychologists will tell you that about 3 to 5% of every large business in this country has bad employees. Look at the bad employees in Baltimore City. Look at the bad employees anywhere. And that's the percentage of bad employees you're going to have. But you can't afford to have 3 to 5% bad cops. Because what do you have? You have civil rights problems. You have people who are arrested for the wrong reasons, and they don't know the law.
Fair enough. Same question. Jazz,
Well-
Daryl D'Souza, here. Jazz is here. She's got some advice for you. What is it?
Well, realistically, the crime is happening in the communities. My advice to him is to obviously the Baltimore Police Department has a lack of resources. There are community organizations out there like the Guardian Angels, like Build, and other agencies, other groups, the churches, things like that, that are willing to step up and serve their communities. And I think if Daryl D'Souza was smart about it, what he'd do is he would go to those agencies and build partnerships, friendships with them, and allow them to help. I mean, the way to fix a community is to be in that community. So I think that's what he needs to do.
Question with regard to those organizations. I'm not speaking about the Angels because I know better, but there is a common thought that some of these community organizations have a vested interest in seeing bad things continue to happen, because if all the crime problems were to be solved tomorrow, those folks, who some of them are paid quite handsomely to run these community organizations, if they're no longer needed, you're out of a job. So there's an argument to be made there that, do they really have a vested interest in seeing things get better?
Well, I mean, look at it this way. Daryl DeSuze is a smart man. He's made it all the way to police commissioner, for God's sake. So he's not stupid. Take a step back, look at the picture, the big picture, and ask yourself that exact same question.
Which one of these is good and which one of these is...
Who is doing this for the right reasons? The churches obviously are not going to be the ones who want the bad things to continue happening. It affects their churches negatively. Work with the churches, the pastors. They all have ministries at these churches. The Guardian Angels, we don't get anything out of this. We don't even live in Baltimore City.
Just to be clear, the Guardian Angels don't make any money. That's why Strider's in Minnesota right now. He's working his butt off, so he can come back and do angel stuff.
I spend
Right.
more than anything else to keep this going, to do what we do. And all of the angels are like that. So when you look at an organization, take a look and see. I mean, we don't get funding from anybody to do what we do.
But if you want this funding, we'll gladly accept donations. You can go to BaltimoreGuardianAngels.net and get the information.
And
It's
we're a 501c3.
That's right.
Yeah, and our tax man's right here.
So, well, guys, it's been a great discussion, and I'm looking forward to the coming weeks and months about how we bring that discussion to where people can watch and even participate in discussing how Baltimore City can move forward. Because folks who live outside Baltimore City need to recognize, as goes the city, as goes everything around it, because it really is the economic engine for most of the counties surrounding it. I mean, if you're going to go out to see a play, or you're going to go catch a ball game, or you're going to go to a really fancy restaurant, you're driving into Baltimore City to do that. That's where you go and spend your money, and that's where so many businesses are headquartered and things of that nature. So people who say, oh, I'll just fence off the city and let the drug dealers have it, and there are a lot of people who say that kind of thing. It's just not going to work, because this is the economic engine for a good chunk of the state. So we have to all be concerned about it. And I think that thought gets lost on a lot of people. But I'm looking forward to seeing how this discussion continues, and hopefully those folks who are on the outside who've kept their opinions to themselves will step up and start taking some active role in the discussion, because I think that's so important. So in closing, any final words, Taxman?
Just have to keep working at it.
All right. Jazz?
I just want to say thanks for joining us.
Oh,
today.
absolutely. Glad to be here. Strider told me I had to, and he's got pictures I don't want anybody to see. So, no.
Of you ice fishing.
Yeah, right. No, but thank you so much for joining us for this inaugural edition of Beyond the Streets TV. In fact, we don't even know what the heck we're going to exactly call it just yet, do we, Jess?
Well, it's going to be Beyond the Streets, but we have changed formats from just being an audio podcast and, to being a video production, and we are now on TV Free Baltimore. So
excellent. And we have to thank our producer Dan Cosgrove for all of his hard work putting everything together, and we have to thank our security officer Taz, who's standing by the door guarding things right over there right now, and of course our fearless leader Strider, who is on special assignment ice fishing right now. We have to thank him as well. So Taxman, thank you very much. Jazz, thank you very much. I'm Maynard Edwards. We'll catch you right here next time with the Baltimore Guardian Angels when we go Beyond the Streets.
I wish that Franklin D. Roosevelt had lived to see this day.